Okay, here we are with Louise for our second episode of Bernie and Louise Knapp Family History, and she's going to talk about where she was born and her early life. So, take it away, cool snubs.
Okay, as a preface, I want to say how much things have changed technologically. Um, I worked at Foothill Treatment Center, drug and alcohol rehab for Utah County. I started there in 1993, and sometime not too long after that, and I don't know when, Tim came and worked uh, at the same place, and I don't think he finished his 2 week training. Later, I asked him, "Well, Tim, why didn't you stay at Foothill?" And he said, "Well, I opened the computer and it said you have performed an illegal operation." He said, "I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know if I was going to be in trouble." I don't know if that's the whole reason he didn't continue on there, but now he makes his living on the computer. And he has this technological ability to be able to do YouTube history. Technology has just changed so much, and it's really interesting.
So,
Okay, go ahead, Tim.
so when I was in high school was the first time I ever heard of the internet, and I'm always a few years behind the trends. So, when I went on my mission, I did not have an email address, and a convert on my mission, set up my first email address. And so when I got home was the first time I ever used the internet, and that was when I was working at Foothill. And so I didn't know what the heck was going on. I thought that it was accusing me of looking at pornography or something. But you're right, it's not the only reason why I didn't finish my training. There were other reasons.
Okay. I was born March 5th, 1939, in Marion, Summit County, Utah. Marion is a little farming community between Camas and Oakley in Summit County. It's just east of Park City, a few miles. Nowadays, you can get from Park City to Camas in about 30 minutes, and from Camas to Marion in about 5 or 10. I was born at my Uncle Joseph and Aunt Reddy's house, and that was in Marion. We lived up on the upper loop, they lived on the lower loop. My mom said that it was a cold, windy, blustery day. She told me that my Uncle Joseph kept saying to her, "Well, it's my birthday tomorrow. Why don't you just hold off, not have your baby till tomorrow?" Mom said she was so annoyed. If you're in labor, you just can't stand external annoyances, and I mean it's all you can do to stand it anyway. And then he kept saying, finally Aunt Reddy told him to leave leave her alone. she's she's so thankful when Aunt Reddy made him stop bugging her.
Was there a
Oh,
was there a doctor or a nurse there too?
a doctor did come. In those days, they did home visits. Yeah. Uh, my parents are John Ivan Andrus Sr. and Susie Mae Duke, who had married Harold Winterton, and he got killed, and then she married my father, Ivan Andrus. My father had been married to Cordelia, they called her Della, Stevenson, and he and she had 3 children. John Ivan Andrus Jr., he went by John, Irma, and Edith. And then Della died, and there were different ideas about what she died from. Some said it was a goiter, that's a swelling in the neck that can eventually choke you off. People used to have goiters that they claimed was from lack of iodine. So then they began to put iodine in salt. That's why we had iodized salt. Some people said it was a heart attack, and I don't think my dad ever did know what it was. Now, at near the same similar time, my mother had married Harold Winterton, and she and he had 3 children, Norman, Margie, and Harold. And my mom's husband was killed in a truck train accident in Springville, Utah. He and his father, Hiram Winterton, were taking a load of cattle somewhere, and there was not a warning on the railroad crossing, and then he saw a train coming, and he turned to avoid hitting the train on the track, and when he turned, the cattle flipped to one side and tipped the truck over into the train, and it killed Harold and some of the cattle, and it didn't hurt his father. So that left my parents both single, and then they married each other, and then they had Kenneth, me, Douglas, a girl stillborn that they named Anna, a boy stillborn that they named Robert, and then Jim. So for me, that meant I grew up in a big family, which I dearly loved. Something that was kind of interesting, so Pa's 3 children were not blood related to Mom's 3 children. They were separate families, an Andrus family and a Winterton family. But John, my father's son John, married my mother's daughter Margie. Well, John was my half-brother and Margie was my half-sister.
So were they dating while they lived in the same house?
Well, that was before I was born, but Margie told me, later after, she said that when John was drafted into the Navy in World War II, and then he asked Margie to marry her, and she said, oh no, I'm not sure on the chronology of the history. Anyway, at one point he wanted her to marry him, and she said, well, we couldn't do that. People would say we had to get married. But anyway, when he came home on furlough from the Navy, they got married in the Salt Lake Temple. So I don't know about their dating growing up.
Well, I like to picture him asking her out on a date and says he's going to pick her up at 6 o'clock, and then he walks down the hallway to her door and picks her up, and then when he drops her off, he walks her down the hallway to her door, and then he walks down to his room, and then the next day they see each other at breakfast, and then if she decides to break up with him, she says, I've decided we should just be siblings.
Well, I think you should picture it that way if you'd like to. That's lovely. um, I guess the only person that's left alive that would have any memory of that would be my brother Ken. Uh, when Joan and Margie got married, I was in the first grade. They got married on Valentine's Day, uh, but I don't remember them being together at home.
Okay, well, let's move on to your childhood.
Um, Ken was 4 years older than me, and because there were a couple of babies that didn't live between me and Doug, there was 6 years between me and Doug. So I had the advantage of growing up in a large family, but it was almost like I was raised an only child. I didn't have any competition with my siblings because Ken was older and Doug was so much younger. I had a very lovely childhood. Um, I was treated well. I was the only little girl, and I think my dad favored little girls. In fact, this is kind of a detour, but I observed this once. After Irma had several children, she came to visit during what we called pea season. We raised over 40 acres of peas and sold them commercially to a canning company that canned peas. And during pea season, it was very, very stressful. The men folks worked so hard. They'd have to get up at daylight and start to harvest the peas. You had to harvest them when they were just the right stage of maturity so that you got the fullness of the pea because it was more volume, and vegetables and fruit are there's a best time for them. You didn't want them to get too old and tough. So whenever the field man came and told them, well, now you need to do this bunch this time, why they had to do it, and they worked from daylight till dark and heavy, strong, physical manual labor. But Irma was there with her kids, and my dad picked Irene up. She was just an infant. She's a toddler, and he picked her up and gave her a kiss on the cheek, and he said, well, I'm glad you're a cute little girl. If you're a little boy, I'd just as lief spit on you. He would have been annoyed because the kids would go tromp through the pea field, and if they tromp over the pea vines and knock them down, then it was hard to harvest them. So he had a lot of grandkids that were tromping the pea vines. Okay, so I did not go to kindergarten because World War II had just ended, and they said that they couldn't afford the gas to run the bus to haul kindergarten kids to school, so I started in first grade. I enjoyed my school years. I went to school in Camas. I loved living on the ranch. We lived on the upper loop in Marion, and my dad had sheep, and we had a few horses. We did our farm work with horses. We usually had 2 or 3 milk cows, and the men folks would milk the cows night and morning, and the milk that we didn't use, we would put in big 10-gallon milk cans, and the milkman would come around every day and pick those up and take them to a creamery in Oakley where they made cheese. And we would get paid for the milk and the cream, and we could get butter and cheese as part of the payment, so we always had all the butter and cheese we wanted. Now, I do remember when I was real little that my mother made butter. She had a churn that had a handle that turned. So she'd put the milk in there and turn it, and it would change to butter, and then she'd pour off the buttermilk. And we had a milk separator. You'd pour the milk in the top and turn a handle, and it'd spin it around, and milk would come out one spigot, and cream would come out another spigot. But by the time I was, probably in first, second, or third grade or something, while we just sent it to the creamery. Um, we we made our money with sheep, selling lambs and selling wool, and then, like I mentioned, the commercial peas. Our country was a good country to raise peas in because it was cool. The trouble is, though, if you had your peas growing up and they were into the blossom and you got a frost, it might kill the whole crop. And one year we got a killer frost in July. It killed the whole cash crop that year. But some years we did real well. In fact, the one year we had such a good pea crop that for the only time in my father's life, he bought a brand new car right off the car lot. 1950. And that was, we sure thought that was great.
What kind of car?
Chevy. and Chevy didn't have several different models at that time. General Motors did. General Motors had Cadillac and Buick and Pontiac and Chevrolet, and can't remember if there's another one. Oh, GMC, I guess. But this was a four-door sedan, white. Ken was playing in it, and it had a cigarette lighter, and he pulled it out and unscrewed it, and put the handle back in, and it shorted out the coil and made it smoke. He got in Dutch for that. I don't think the cigarette lighter ever worked again, but then we didn't need it anyway, so we didn't have anything to plug into it in those days except heated up to light a cigarette, and since we didn't need that, it didn't matter. But it did have a radio in it.
Nice. Okay. Thanks. You think that's good for one session?